So let's do IT Essentials Module 5, okay? What is a personal area network? What is a personal area network? That would be a network that connects devices within a range of individual persons, within a range of an individual person. Which wireless technology is most commonly used for PAN connections? Which wireless technology is most commonly used for PAN connections? That would be Bluetooth. Which type of device are typically connected in a PAN? Which type of devices are typically connected in a PAN? That would be a mouse, a keyboard, printer, cell phones, and tablets. What is the primary characteristics of VLANs, virtual land area networks? That would be they group users based on logical boundaries instead of physical boundaries because it's virtual. Which broadband technology uses different frequencies to send multiple signals over the same medium? It's called a cable network, cable internet. What type of connector is used to connect the DSL modem to the phone line? Wait, let's start with what is DSL? Digital subscriber line. Okay. What type of connector is used to connect a DSL modem to a phone line? RJ11. Which internet technology uses light to transmit data through glass or plastic cables? Which internet technology uses light to transmit data through glass or plastic cables? That would be fiber optic. What is the main advantage of fiber optic cables? Very high bandwidth, capable of carrying large amounts of data. Very high bandwidth, that is capable of carrying large amounts of data. Which internet connection type is often the only optional in rural areas without DSL or cable? Which internet connection type is often the only option in the rural areas without the DSL or cable? That would be satellite. Satellite internet connection is the only option. What technology allows a cell phone to share its internet connection with other devices? That would be tethering. How can tethering be established between devices? Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, USB cable. That's how tethering can be used, that can be established between devices. What is a mobile hotspot? What is a mobile hotspot? When a cellular phone allows Wi-Fi devices to connect and use the mobile data for network or internet. Which generation of cellular technology first enables cell phones to access the internet? That would be the 3G. 3G was the generation of cellular technology that first enabled cell phones to access the internet. What percentage of US adults relied solely on smartphones for internet access? What percentage of US adults relied solely on smartphones for internet access according to the 2018 Pew Research data? That would be 20% of US adults. What is the default VLAN assigned to all switch ports? What is the default VLAN what is the default VLAN assigned to all switch ports? That would be VLAN VLAN 1. What does VLAN stand for? Virtual Land Area Network. Which internet technology uses cell phone towers to distribute throughout the coverage of the which internet technology uses cell phone towers distributed throughout coverage areas? That would be cellular. Cellular would be the internet technology that is used that uses cell phone towers that is distributed throughout coverage areas. What is the purpose of a setup or a connection? Setup, a connection, or network visit. To configure a link to the ISP server. It would be to configure a link to the ISP server. What does ISP stand for? It stands for Internet Service Provider. To configure a link to the Internet Service Provider server. Which broadband technology is considered the main backbone of the Internet? Which broadband technology is considered the main backbone of the Internet? That would be fiber optic networks. What type of internet access uses an analog modem to place telephone calls to remote modems? What type of internet access uses an analog modem to place telephone calls to remote modems? That would be a dial-up. Which network type typically uses a wired cable to connect devices in a small geographical area? Which network type typically uses a wired cable to connect devices in a small geographical area? That would be land area network, local area network, not land area node. Okay, I get it. LLAN, which is local area network. And then what is the primary purpose of a network what is the primary purpose of the network repeater? What is the primary purpose of a network repeater? That would be it regenerates weak signals to extend their travel distance. It regenerates weak signals to extend their travel distance. How does a network hub handle incoming data? How does a network hub handle incoming data? It sends the data out to all other pods. What is the key characteristic of a legacy network hub? Devices connected to it can share the bandwidth. The devices that are connected to it can share the bandwidth. What is the microsegmentation in the context of network switches? What is the microsegmentation in the context of network switches? That would be sending data only to the specific device it is intended to. That would be sending data only to the specific device it is intended for. Which device uses MAC addresses to forward traffic within a single network? Which devices uses MAC addresses to forward traffic within a single network? That would be a switch. A switch is the device that uses MAC addresses to forward traffic within a single network. Which device uses IP addresses to forward traffic between different networks? Which device uses IP addresses to forward traffic between different networks? That would be a router. A router is the device that uses IP addresses to forward traffic between different networks. What is the common feature of managed switch that an unmanaged switch typically lacks? What is the common feature of a managed switch that an unmanaged switch typically lacks? Configurable features like VLANs and POT security. Configurable features such as VLAN and POT security. What is the primary function of a wireless access point? Wireless access point, what is the primary function of it? To provide network access to the wireless devices using radio waves. To provide network access to wireless devices using radio waves. What is the integrated router? What is an integrated router? An integrated router is a multi-purpose device that often includes a switch, a router, and a wireless AP, a wireless access point. Yeah. It's a multi-purpose device that often includes a switch, a router, and a wireless access point. What is the main purpose of a network firewall? What is the main purpose of a network firewall? To protect the data and equipment from unauthorized access. To protect the data and equipment from unauthorized access. What does a firewall use to determine permitted and denied network access? What does a firewall use to determine permitted or denied network access? It uses an access control list, an ACL, an access control list. What is a unified threat management? UTM. What is a UTM? Unified threat management. An all-in-one security appliance that includes IDS, IPS, and stateful firewall services. What does IDS and IPS stand for? Intrusion detection system and intrusion protection preventative system, prevention system. The other one detects, the other one prevents. What does a stateful firewall track? What does a stateful firewall track? It tracks the connection information, including source, destination, addresses, and the port numbers. It tracks the connection information, which includes the source address and the port numbers. Which standard can supply up to 25 watts of power for power over Ethernet? PoE, power over Ethernet. Which standard can supply up to 25 watts of power for the power over Ethernet? That would be 802.3 at. Which standard can supply up to 25 watts of power over Ethernet? Power over Ethernet. It would be the 802.3 at, or AF. You can say AF, or you can say AAT, same thing. What is the main advantage of power line networking? What is the main advantage of power line networking? It uses existing electrical wiring to connect devices, avoiding new data cables. It uses existing electrical wiring to connect devices, avoiding new data cables. What is the purpose of SPF? Sender Policy Framework. Sender Policy Framework, what is the purpose of it? It would be to identify authorized SMTPs service for sending emails for a domain. To identify authorized SMTPs servers for sending emails for a domain. What does SMTP stand for? It stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. To identify the authorized Simple Mail Transfer Protocol servers for sending emails for a domain. How does domain keys identified mail, DKIM, how does domain keys identified mail enhance email security? How does it enhance email security? It uses cryptographic authentication with digital signatures. It uses cryptographic authentication with digital signatures. What is the process of air grabbing? What is the process of air grabbing? That would be physically isolating legal systems from other networks, particularly the internet. It would be physically isolating legacy systems from other networks, particularly the internet. Which device centralizes the management of all network devices into one dashboard interface? Which device centralizes the management of all network devices into one dashboard interface? It would be a cloud-based controller like Cisco Meraki. A cloud-based controller like Cisco Meraki. What is the key difference between a hub and a switch? What is the key difference between a hub and a switch? A switch provides dedicated bandwidth via the micro-segmentation, while a hub shares a bandwidth. A switch provides dedicated bandwidth via the micro-segmentation, while a hub shares a bandwidth. What is the primary function of a network hub? What is the primary function of a network hub? It regenerates the data signal and sends it to all the pods. It regenerates the data signal and sends it to all the pods. Which network technology is required to connect? Which network technology is required to connect the branch offices in different countries to central headquarters? Which network technology is required to connect branch offices in different countries to one central headquarters? That would be WAN. What does WAN stand for? Wide Area Network. Which network service automatically assigns IP addresses to devices? Which network service automatically assigns IP addresses to devices? That would be the DHCP. What's that? What is the DHCP? That would be the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. Which security technology is used to passively monitor network traffic to detect possible attacks? Which security technology is used to passively monitor the network traffic and detect possible attacks? IDS. IDS. What does IDS stand for? It stands for Intrusion Detection System. It stands for Intrusion Detection System. Which two protocols operate at the transport layer of the TCP or the IP model? Which two protocol operates at the transport layer of the TCP? Which two protocol operates at the transport layer of the TCP or the IP model? What does the TCP stand for again? It stands for the Transmission Control Protocol. It stands for the Transmission Control Protocol. Those are the two protocols that are the TCP and the UDP. What does UDP stand for? Because we know TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and UDP stands for? It stands for User Datagram Patrol. User Datagram Patrol. Why am I saying patrol? Protocol. Yes, User Datagram Protocol. Which type of network intends a short distance and connects peripherals with printers and keyboards to a host? Which type of network extends a short distance to connect peripherals such as printers and keyboards to a host? That would be the PAN. What does the PAN stand for? That would be the Personal Area Network. Personal Area Network. Okay, which three I almost said UFOs. Which three Wi-Fi standards operate in 2,4 GHz frequency rates. Which three Wi-Fi standards operate in the 2.4 gigahertz frequency range? That would be the 208.11b, and then it would be the 200 why did I say 200? It would be the 802.11b and the 802.11g and the 202.11n. Should I repeat that? I'm saying 200 again, aren't I? Wake up, wake up. It would be the 802.11b, it would be the 802.11g, and the 202.11n. What are the two common types of the media used in networks? What are the two common types of media that is used in networks? That would be the copper and the fiber. It would be the copper and the fiber. Those are the two common types of media used within network. Which port number is used by the HTTP traffic? The HTTP traffic. What does HTTP stand for? HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Hypertext Transfer Protocol traffic. Which port number is used by the Hypertext Transfer Protocol traffic? It would be 80. 80 is the port number. Which smart home technology requires a coordinator to create a wireless PAN? Which smartphone home technology is requires a coordinator to create a wireless PAN? That would be the Zigbee. The Zigbee is the smart home technology that requires a coordinator to create a wireless PAN. Which technology uses existing electrical wiring to connect devices to the network? Which technology uses existing electrical wiring to connect devices to a network? That would be the Ethernet over the power. Ethernet over the power. E to the P. Which two standards should a technician research before starting a land cabling project? Which are the two standards should a technician research before starting a land area network cabling project? That would be the T568. I think we can call it whatever here. We can call it the T568A and the T568B. T568A and the T568B. And then at which TCP or IP layer, what does TCP stand for? TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and IP stands for Internet Protocol. Okay, at which Transmission Control Protocol or Internet Protocol layer do the switches primarily operate, forwarding frames based on the MAC addresses? Which layer at which TCP layer do the switches primarily operate, forwarding frames based on the MAC addresses? That would be the network access layer. It would be at what? The network access layer. At which TCP layer do the routers primarily operate, forwarding packets based on the IP addresses? At which TCP layer do the routers primarily operate, forwarding packets based on the IP address? That would be the internet layer. The internet layer is where the TCP layer do routers primarily operate, forwarding the packets based on the IP addresses. What is the key difference between IDS and IPS? What does IDS stand for? It stands for Intrusion Detection and Intrusion Prevention. IDS, Intrusion Detection, Intrusion Preventive System. The IDS passively The intrusion detection system passively monitors while the intrusion prevention system actively blocks these malicious traffic. Should I repeat? The intrusion detection system passively monitors while the intrusion prevention system actively blocks the malicious traffic. What type of signal does a fiber optic cable use to transmit data? What type of signal does a fiber optic cable use to transmit data? That would be the light pulses. What is the main purpose of twisted in the twisted pair cable? What is the main purpose of the twisted in the twisted pair cable? To protect from signal, and it's to protect from signal. It's to protect the signal from interferences. It's to protect the signal from interferences. Which cellular generation has enough bandwidth to support augmentation and virtual reality? Which cellular generation has enough bandwidth to support augmented and virtual reality? That would be 5G. 5G is the cellular generation that has enough bandwidth to support augmented and virtual reality. Which wireless standard is a proprietary? Which wireless standard is a proprietary protocol for smart home applications? That would be the Z-Wave. The Z-Wave is the wireless standard that is proprietary protocol for smart home applications. What is the function of a network interference card? Network interference card, and what is the function of it? It would be to provide physical connectivity for an end device to a network. It would be to provide physical connection or connectivity for an end device to a network. Yeah, we're done. Whew. Finally, 60 of them.